So, ladies and gentlemen, we are now doing a very brief revision of what we had already done. So we haven't recorded those bits that merely repeat what I had said last time, but there is something I would like to emphasize, which is that I pointed out that a very pleasing property of the verb yem, I am, is that in the imperfect too, the endings I was, you were in the singular, he was, or she was, or it was, and so on, or I used to be, and so on. The imperfect, those endings, ei, eir, er, and in the plural, eak, eik, ein, happily provide us with the endings of verbs in the ye conjugation, such as sirem, sirei, sireir, sirer, sireak, sireik, sirein, and of the verbs in the e conjugation, of which my usual example is chosim. So chosei, choseir, choser, choseak, choseik, chosein. So the endings ei, eir, er, eak, eik, ein are found in the verbs in the ye conjugation and in the verbs in the e conjugation. And the endings are the same for the ye conjugation and the e conjugation. But there is an interesting implication from this. If I say I love, I say sirem. If I want to say I am loved, in other words, I want to create the passive voice of sirem, I say sirim. But sirim behaves grammatically as chosim. But we have seen that chosim has the same endings in the imperfect as does sirem. What does that mean? That means sirim and sirem, I am loved and I love, the passive voice and the active voice, have exactly the same endings in ancient Armenian in the imperfect. That means that if you see sirei, it is not clear whether I loved or whether I was loved. And you have to decide this from the context. So this takes me to this example. Մգրդեր եւ Հովանես եւ Կային եւ մգրդեին. In principle, both verbs can be active or passive, because mgurder and mgurdein are the imperfect forms of both mgurdem, which means I baptize, the active voice, and of mgurdim, which means I am baptized. Now, as it happens, we know from the Bible, from the New Testament, this is from the Epistle of St. Paul to Titus, that the sentence refers to Mgurder yev Hovannes. John also baptized, so Mgurder means he baptized. It's the active, but then in the same sentence, yev Kain yev Mgurdein, and they would come and be baptized. Now it's the passive. So Mgurder, in the first case, happens to be the imperfect of the verb mgurdam, which is active voice, I baptize, and mgurdein corresponds to the passive form mgurdim. You can't guess that by just looking without looking at the context of it, because the forms are the same. And the forms are the same because chosem, sirem and chosim have the same endings in the imperfect, which means that mgurdem and mgurdim and sirem yev sirim have the same endings in the imperfect tense. So we do have such situations in ancient Armenian, which could, in principle, result in ambiguity, whereas in modern Armenian, that ambiguity has been removed. So I think that we did those exercises last time. Did we not? Marku, can you remember the exercises on this slide?
Yeah, sorry. I cannot remember right now.
Okay, then I might as well go through them in that case. Մարմինիմ ճշմարիտ գերագուր է եւ արյունիմ ճշմարիտ ըմբելի է. My body is true nourishment, is real food, and my blood is a true drink, a real drink. Ոչ սիրե զեղբայր յուր զոր դեսան է. He does not love his brother whom he sees. Որ սիրես Աստված, սիրե նաև զեղբայր յուր. He who loves God, or whoever loves God, also loves his brother. Kovemk eskez, we praise thee. In other words, we praise you in modern English, where you is in the singular. Ser ոչ նախանցի, ոչ բարդանա, ոչ խորի ըսչար. Love does not envy, is not proud, and does not think evil. Եղբայրն Ղազարոս հիվանդ. The brother, or their brother, or her brother, note that we're in the nominative, եղբայր, եղբայրն, so we can't say zechbær because that would give us the accusative. So we use the nu, the suffix nu, to make it definite. And so here the nu provides definiteness. It's not being used in a demonstrative way, but it is being used to give definiteness. Remember, we said that the addition of the nu at the end can have two alternative purposes. Եղբայրն Ղազարոս հիվանդ էր. So the brother, or their brother, Lazarus, was ill. Kagin mi haneles chur. A woman comes to take water, to take out water, or in order to take out water. The infinitive is used to express purpose in this sentence. Sirem kzortin astudzo. We love the Son of God. Poch yev hanark hanchain. Horns and lyres would sound, or were sounding, or sounded. Jesus lur gair. Jesus stood silent. Now, we saw that we have those 6 morphologically distinct cases: the nominative, uragan, the accusative, haitzagan, in Armenian, the genitive, seragan, the dative, dragan, and often we find that the genitive and the dative have the same forms, the ablative, patsaragan, and the instrumental, kordziagan. The vocative does not really exist, but we find it in isolated instances, such as, for example, emulating the Greek, where in Greek Petros means Peter, Bedros in Armenian. So the vocative in Greek is Petre. And so the Armenian follows that morphology, and so Bedre, asem kes bedre, I tell you, Peter. In other words, I tell you, oh, Peter. In Czech, Bedros is Petr, and the vocative is again Petre. Já ti říkám, Petre. I tell you, oh, Peter. So this kind of exception does exist, but otherwise, generally speaking, Armenian does not have a vocative. And I had mentioned that we can create some further cases by employing prepositions or suffixes, prefixes, and so on, but we won't go over these today. And I had also demonstrated those numbers to you, the use of the alphabet to indicate numerals. Base 10 is used. G is 10 and G is 11. Ini, the next letter after G, is 20, and so we get the next letters 30, 40, and so on, until we get to 90, which is Rad. J is 100, and Ra is 1000. But you will find, particularly in Armenian medieval manuscripts and even old books, that the year that is given in the Armenian chronology needs to be converted to Anno Domini, the years after the birth of Christ, by adding 551. And sometimes it's not that simple, because when you go from the Armenian year to the standard year of what is known as the common era nowadays, it may be a little less or a little more, because the old Armenian year, which has its own month names, doesn't start in January and doesn't end in December. So there's a sort of shift. So it's very interesting. If you're interested in the oldest published Armenian book, there is controversy. Was it 1512 or 1513 and so on? If you look at my book of 2016, The Art of the Armenian Book Through the Ages, I have a discussion of this briefly. And now we've reached the point of the end of our last lecture, when I gave this table to you, this my favorite blue table, and I said this is one of those few things that I urge you or which I strongly recommend you to commit to memory, to memorize, because it's really worth it and it will help you a lot. Now, let's take a short break and stop recording at this moment.
Now.
Splendid. So, we return to this table that I had quickly introduced last time, and here you can see the 6 cases of the personal pronouns, which are yes, tu, na, and the plurals mek, tuk, noka in the nominative. I, thou, or you in modern English, but in the singular number, and he, she, or it, and then the adjacent columns are the respective plurals of those. We, ye, or in modern English you, but making it clear that it's in the plural, and they. So, yes, tu, na, mek, tuk, noka. So, as we go downwards, we advance to each successive case in the usual order. So, usually after the nominative, we look at the accusative, because for many things it's the same, but in the case of the personal pronouns, it's not the same. So, if we want the accusative of yes, which is I in English, so if we want to say me, that's this. And in the plural mek, we, if we want the accusative us, it's asmez. Excuse me. Second person singular, tu. If we want the accusative, it's azkez. So in Czech it will be ti and tebe. In older English, thou and thee. So it's you in the singular as the subject of a sentence, and you in the singular as the object of a sentence. Tu azkez. In the plural we have tuk and azkez. Na, he, she, or it, and if we want the accusative, him, her, or it, that's azna. That's easy. We're just adding the prefix za. And it's easy in the plural as well. From noka, we get aznosa. So the ke becomes a se in the usual way, according to the usual pattern, and the prefix z is added. So they and them, noka and aznosa. Now the genitives. So the genitive of yes is im. Of mek, its plural is mer. Of tu, let me enlarge this. A pity I didn't do so earlier. Of tu is ko. You and your. The plural tuk. You have tser. Again, you and your in modern English, but in older English it would be thou and thy for the singular, and ye and your in the plural. And he, she, or it, oops, he, she, or it, here we are, na, nora, his or her or its. And the plural, they, the genitive there is notsa. Now, notice that the dative differs from the genitive for the personal pronouns. So that makes it more interesting, because for nouns we have hitherto found that they look the same. But in the case of the personal pronouns, they're not the same. So to me is ints, to us is mez. To you in the singular is kez, to you in the plural is tsez. To him, to her, to it in this is nama, and to them is notsa. So notsa is the same, but all the others are different. Even the plural ones are different. Now, from me or out of me, the ablative is hinen. The plural of us or from us is imench. In modern Armenian we would say mezme. From the iken. From you, the plural of the, itsench. And from na we have inamane, from him, from her, from it, and the plural inotsane. Finally, the instrumental case. With someone, or by means of someone, or through someone. So from yes, which is I, we have with me, or through me, or by means of me, inev. Mek, meok, the plural. Second person, from tu, kev. And the plural tuk, tseok. So there's a pattern. Meok, tseok, and nokok. From mek, tuk, and noka. The third person, na, gives us novav. and the plural from noka, nokok. So, if you can try and learn this, it will be a great help and well worth it. But we're going to come across those many times, particularly some of them. And there are a few examples, but before we look at those, remember that in addition to na, we had an alternative form, ink. And in addition to naka, we had the alternative form, inkyank. And I said that these are more likely to be encountered in a sort of reflexive form or when it's the same as the subject of the sentence. But for completeness, let's decline those as well. So inken gives us the accusative is zinken. The genitive and the dative are the same, inkyan, inkyan. Ablative hinkene, and instrumental is inkyamp. Plural inkyank, zinkyanus, the accusative. Genitive inkyans. Dative the same as the genitive in this case, inkyans. Ablative hinkyans, and instrumental plural inkyamk. These you will probably encounter less often than those. So do take a screenshot of this and maybe print it out and put it on your wall so that you can look at it and gradually get used to it. I've got a Czech version of this as well, which if you happen to know Czech, is better because in Czech, much more so than in English, these various forms are largely different from each other. They're not all different, but they're mostly different. So you can more readily understand the equivalent forms. So perhaps Marek can remind me to make the Czech version of this table available as well. So, some examples. Durins. Dur is the imperative mood of the verb dam, which means I give. So, give me. So, if we look at this table, you see ins is the dative. So, give unto me, we might say in a more archaic way, give me, it's the dative. Durmesder, the plural. There's a well-known hymn, Durmesder, Durmesder, give unto us, O Lord, give us. Again, the dative. Arnu hinen, takes from us. Hinen is the ablative. Sorry, from me. The singular, of course, Arnu hinen. Asem says, I tell you, I tell thee. So it says, it is here. So we would say, strictly speaking, in older English, I tell you, I say unto you, I say to you. Mi vomen itsench, one of you. Remember, vomen is indefinite. Mi vomen is something that you find when someone makes a donation to a church, for example, and wishes to remain anonymous. On the piece of paper where it has been recorded who donated what sums of money, the anonymous person is indicated as mi vomen, someone. Mi vomen itsench, it means one of you. On Maundy Thursday at the Voden Leva, at the feet washing ceremony in church, we sing the hymn I sorgank netzav avazan magerdutian, where we recollect that Christ said, Mi vomni tsenchech park. One of you, brothers, is going to betray me. Mi vomen itsench. Kev habardemk. Now, in Armenian, even in modern Armenian, we would say kezmov habardenk. We use the instrumental. We say we are proud with you, as it were. Of course, in English we say we are proud of you. But in Armenian we use the instrumental, so kev. Badmer notsa, he told them or he narrated to them. Again, you see, this is the dative. Looks the same as the genitive, but of course its function here is the dative. Yev da nama. He gives him. He gives unto him. Nama is the dative. Again, you can check it here. It's the dative row of na, and you can find it here. So this is a very useful little table. I strongly recommend that you look at it. Now, an interesting thing is that if we look at this row where we've got the genitive of those personal pronouns, im, mer, ko, tser, nora, notsa, these are at the same time possessive adjectives. Im, ko, mer, tser. Im means my, ko means your. Your and nora mean her or his or its. Mer is our, tser is yours in the plural, and yurians or notsa means their. Now, what about your and yurians? Your and yurians can be theoretically considered to be the genitive of yet another personal pronoun, which, however, does not exist in the nominative and accusative singular. So we could construct a table like this, where there's nothing there for the singular nominative and nothing there for the singular accusative, but we have the genitive your, which at the same time is a possessive adjective, and yurian the dative, yurme the ablative, and yuriamp or yuriav the instrumental. So this is just a sort of curiosity. The plural is complete. You've got yuriank, nominatives, yurianus, accusative, yurians and yurians, genitive and dative, the same form. Yurians, from them, or out of them, or amongst them, and yuriampuk, with them, through them, by means of them. Now, let's quickly look at some prepositions as well. Usually, these are placed before the noun or the pronoun that they go with, and the case that they take is not always the same as in modern Armenian. So, for example, in modern Armenian, to say without me, we would say arans inzi, which is the dative. But in ancient Armenian, we must use the genitive, as in Czech, in fact. So, let's look at a number of examples where we use a preposition and a genitive. Ivera means above something, over something. Inerko has two distinct meanings. One means below something, under something, and the other meaning is inside something. Ardako, it means outside something. You might prefer to say outside of something in a slightly more American way. So that will remind you that we use the genitive. Image also has two different but related meanings. Image means inside something or in the middle of something. Arachi means before something, in front of something. Özgani means after something on a time axis or behind something on a spatial frame. Özhead can mean with something or someone or after something or someone. There's a prayer that as a schoolboy we used to say, Zogormutun koder özhedim yegeste zamenain avurus genatimots. Amen. Thy mercy, O Lord, may it come with me all the days of my life. Amen. Hagarag, against someone, that takes the genitive. Arans, as I said, also takes the genitive. And vásn has two different meanings, and they both require the genitive. Vásn for the sake of something. So, for example, when a clergyman reads the gospel and describes the crucifixion of Christ, he will sing Vásn Cumulative Yaren Mero Isusi Christos. Cumulative takes the genitive. And it means regarding in this sense. But vásn can also mean for the sake of. Even in modern Armenian, we say vásnin chi, for the sake of what? It's the genitive again. So these are prepositions that take the genitive. I mentioned to you that the systematic declension of the demonstrative pronouns will be done much later, but here it's appropriate to introduce you also the construction vásn isorig, which means because of this, for this, therefore, and isorig happens to be the genitive of the demonstrative pronoun eis. Likewise, from eit, vásn eitorig, and from ein, vásn einorig. And you'd better treat those as idioms now. Vásn means why. We also have unter, which means why. And vásn it means for whom. For the moment, treat those as idioms. So, we said that we need the genitive, so let's look at the genitive of personal pronouns, because we now know the genitive of personal pronouns. Vásnim, it means for my sake, or it means regarding me. Vásn ko, vásn nora, possibly vásn inkyan, or vásn yur. Vásn mer, in the plural, vásn tser, vásn notsa, or inkyans, or vásn yurians. So, remember the ablative has very often a partitive use. Pazunk itsench, lavakuinek kanzis. Many of you, it means out of you, are better than I. Lavakuin kanzis, better than I. In English, it is correct to say better than I. Strictly speaking, it is incorrect to say better than me. But in ancient Armenian, you must say better than me. You've got to use the accusative. You cannot say lavakuinek kan yes. You have to say lavakuinek kan zis. Without me, you can do nothing. Arans im. Im, remember the genitive of yes. Aransim vochinch garek arnel. Without me, nothing are you able to do. Arnel means to do something. Arnul means to take something. Whereas in modern Armenia, Arnel means to take. In ancient Armenian, Arnel means to do. And the past tense is arari, I did. Ոչ հավատայք ինձ, you don't believe me. Եվ դու ինոցաներես, you too are one of them. You are one of them. You're from that group. Kortsken v'gayen vasnim. These works testify in my favor, we would say. Christos parechose vasmer. Christ intercedes for our sakes. Parechose, literally, to say good things about someone. Novav hachtemk. With him we triumph. In other words, through him. He is the instrument. Na, novav is the instrumental case. So all this is practice to help you learn this table, this blue table. So we are able gradually to expand our repertoire. Now, some more sentences. Batvagane anun nora arachinotsa. His name is honorable before them. Arachikoen amenai nerichk im. All my tormentors are before thee, are in front of you, in the singular. Avasig yes arakemes reshtagim arachiko. Behold, I'm sending my messenger before thee. Horjam desanein zna, anganein arachinora, agagagein, yevasein te tu es vortinastudzo, yevna huij sasternotsa. When they saw him, upon seeing him, they would fall before him, cry out or shout, and say, Thou art the Son of God. In other words, you are the Son of God, in the singular. And he would reprimand them severely. Huij means very, extremely. Vor ոչ parna is chachur, Եվ ոչ կա ըզգնի իմ, ոչ կարե իմ աշակերտ լինել. He who does not carry or take his cross and does not come behind me, does not follow me, cannot be my disciple. A lot of things in this sentence. Ըզգնիim, of course, which we just saw. Ոչ կարե, garem is I can. Ոչ կարե, or չգարե, as we saw. Ոչ կարե is cannot, is not able to. Քնացին ըզգնի նորա. They went after him. Եկ ըզգնիim. Եկ is the second person singular imperative. Come after me. Yertain is head nora. They went behind him or they went with him. You have to judge from the context, which is the most likely. Havadaik te garogem arnel says zait. Do you believe that I'm able to do that to you? So, a reminder here that arnem means I do or I create, whereas arnum is what corresponds to the modern Armenian arnem, which means I take. Some more sentences. Hoviven arachinotsa yerta, Եվ ոչխարքն ըզհեդ նորա երթան, զիջանաչեն ըսցայն նորա. The shepherd goes in front of them or before them, and the sheep go behind him or with him, for they know his voice or they recognize his voice. Ոչ քո արդար ի վերա երկրի. There does not exist anyone just. There is no just man or woman. There's no one just over the earth. Kortsken zorkordzem v'gayen vasnim. I think we saw this a moment ago. The works that I perform testify for me or speak in my favor, bear witness in my favor. Ոչ հավադայք ինձ, you don't believe me. Մեղքիմ առաջի իմեն համենայն ժամ. My sins are before me all the time or at all times. Theoretically, this could also mean my sin is before me at all times, because mechk is always plural in form. So that's why we've got mechk yen, even though its meaning can be singular or plural, depending on the context. It is what is known as an anezagan koyagan. In Latin, they call this pluralia tantum. It is when grammatically the form is always plural, but the meaning can be plural or singular. We shall deal with those later. Lses zinchasen toka. Do you hear what they say? Asen yevocharnen. They say and they do not do. So they say something but they don't do it. And 5 more sentences. Zaraiken mer pachchein imench. Our servants were running away, were escaping, were fleeing from us. Christos vasen mer merav. Christ died for our sake, or for our sakes. Bedros ızhed nora yertar. Peter would go behind him, would follow him, or would go with him. Both meanings are possible. Paitz Mariam gair ardako keresmanin. So ardako takes the genitive keresman, keresmanin, yevlar. But Mary stood or was standing or would stand outside the grave and weep. So, this concludes this lecture. Are there any questions? If there are some questions, perhaps Marek will pause the recording. Otherwise, we shall proceed to the next lecture. Let's pause.
Now.
Excellent. So now we can continue. I'd like to show you some pretty pictures. And much of this, but not everything, if you want to find out more about, allow me respectfully to recommend my book, one of my books, the one devoted to Armenian books over the centuries, starting with the earliest examples and some spectacularly beautiful volumes. This book is in 3 languages, in English, in Armenian, modern Western Armenian, and in Czech. And the aim of those slides is not only to amuse you, because they're quite impressive and beautiful in many cases, but to allow you to become used to different fonts and different forms of handwriting that you find also in manuscripts from different periods. So this is the Editio Princeps. It's the very first printed edition of the Armenian Hymnal, published in Amsterdam in 1664-1665. And it's very interesting because it has features that you find in Armenian manuscripts, like this sort of headpiece. It's known as a gisachoran, a semi-altar, and ornamented letters where you see that this yech letter, this ye, is made of a bird and something like a snake or something that has that head, and a fish, a bird, and so on, and a marginal ornament. So this side looks very much like an Armenian manuscript, except it's a line drawing and it's not colored. And on the left-hand side, you get a very Western image. What the Armenians were doing, and they did it in the very first Armenian Bible as well in 1666, they bought woodcuts that had already been used for Western Bibles, and they used those. And somehow they managed to integrate the Western image with the Armenian style of ornamentation side by side very nicely. And these are the letters. And over the letters you've got those signs, because this was a hymn that was meant to be sung, and these are musical signs. They're known as neumes, in Armenian chaz, and unfortunately we're not able to read those properly. We don't understand the system. So this is an early publication, and now this is the same book, but another exemplar, because the aim at this time was to print books that looked like manuscripts. Then if you wanted to have a luxury copy to make it, to present it as a prestigious gift to someone important, then you would get the printed book and you would color by hand. So this is the same as this, but someone has colored this copy, this exemplar, which it's the same palette of colors as manuscripts of that period. This is an example. You see, it's the same sort of colors and a similar style. If you compare this with this, for instance. And the letters here in this manuscript are very, very similar to those. So the printed font tries to be similar to the letters used in manuscripts of the same period. This is a lectionary published in Venice a little bit later. Again, you see the same sort of principle. There's that headpiece, marginal ornamentation, and a Western image with images of the various apostles and various prophets there. Again, ornamental letters, hampurescesis. Good, thanks. So, this is a famous book. It's Oskan Vartabed's, Archimandrite Oskan's Bible, published in Amsterdam. The usual year that is cited is 1666, but actually took 2 years to complete. But you see here it says Itavum Perkchin Hazar Vetzar Vatsunavets, in the year of the Savior 1666, and it was a major achievement. And Oskan Vartabed bought wood engraved illustrations, about 100 of them, from the Dutch artist Christoffel van Zichem, and these illustrations ended up in this Armenian Bible. Then what happened is that because monks continued to copy manuscripts, so when Armenians started printing books, it didn't mean that manuscripts stopped being produced. They continued in parallel. And there was a time when, monks in monasteries were a cheap source of labor. So it was not necessarily cheaper to buy a book than to order a manuscript. But the monks who were illustrating and copying manuscripts were aware of the printed books, and so this European art that entered Armenian printed books, via those books entered the Armenian manuscripts. And these are some such illustrations. And again, you can probably read those letters without too much difficulty. It's the same sort of font, or very similar. But this font is different, and I will talk about it in a moment. This is called Noderkir. These are more examples from the same Bible. Now, Marzavanetsi, if I remember correctly, Krikor Marzavanetsi was a remarkable Armenian Constantinopolitan printer and artist. And he was the first person in the world, maybe, and maybe the British learned from him, or maybe the phenomenon occurred in parallel independently in England and in Constantinople. But he was certainly the first, or one of the first, to produce much more delicate wood engravings, because he would work in a different way with the wood. Instead of doing things the easy way, he would work, I believe, using a different orientation of carving relative to the grain of the wood, which is much more difficult to do, but allows much more delicate details. And so this is one of his volumes, and these are very, very rare and valuable. It is a haismavurk. In Greek, it's menologion or synaxarion. It's a volume that, according to the church calendar, tells you about the life of the saint who is being commemorated that day. The next important Bible publication was done by the founder of the Mkhitarist congregation, and it was published in Venice in 1733. And you find that the images are similar but much more refined to those of Oskan. So if you remember what this looks like and compare it to this, it's more or less the same ideas, the same themes, the same shapes in the pictures, but much more delicate and sophisticated here. Another very important Bible, but from a textual point of view, was that of Father Zohrabian, a member of the Venice Mkhitarist congregation, and he made use of particular Cilician manuscripts for his text, and at the bottom of the page indicates variant readings. So it's a scientific edition, and it is still used today for scholarly purposes. The letters, you can, I think, read them easily, but notice that sometimes you find a word is abbreviated and there's a horizontal hook-like sign over it. That sign is called badiv. And here we have I vr yergri, it's I vera yergri. Note, today we said I vera over or above something takes the genitive yergir yergri. I vera yergri, above the earth, over the earth. So, in manuscripts, we have, in the oldest manuscripts, yergatakir, which are uncials. They're like uppercase letters. Polorkir, which is what we saw already, and it is what those printed editions largely imitated. And Noderkir or Nodrakir, which I'll show you in a moment, it corresponds roughly to this font here. And it's later. You find it in later manuscripts. So, this is Yergatakir. This is one of the oldest manuscripts I've ever held, although this is not my hand. This is the hand of a novice who helped me photograph. And notice there are only capital letters, what we would call capital letters, and there are no gaps between the words. So I want you to get used to reading things like this as well. This is from the 9th or 10th century. It's a euchologion. It's a book of rituals like baptism and weddings and burials and ordinations, and it's called Mashtots. This is a transitional stage. This is the earliest extant manuscript of the Book of Lamentation by St. Gregory of Nareg, Supikor Naregatsi, Madyan Perkutian. It was copied in 1173 in Cilicia. It's kept at the Maderatran. This is a facsimile. This isn't the real manuscript. And you can see that it's something between the Yergatakir here and the Polorkir that we're more used to. My next example is closer to Polorkir, but also is a bit different. It's something between Polorkir and this midway thing. And this is a lectionary, a jashots, where you've got biblical excerpts to be read during various services according to the church calendar. So these are the letters. Vornestein ichavari, who would sit in darkness. You see, Gabanats, of bonds. Vor, who. Nestein, imperfect, the ending ein, would sit or were sitting. I chavari, in the darkness. Now, this is from 1348. It's a Dagaran, a book of odes. These were meant to be sung, and look at all those signs. They are neumes, and all these dots and little hooks and little letters. They are known as significative letters. We're not entirely sure what they meant. And this is one of the most detailed and delicately musically notated manuscripts of odes that I've ever seen. I was able to take this photograph in San Lazzaro in Venice. It's a beautiful ode by St. Gregory of Nareg. Yerk Zarmanali, Yerk Sharjvarjeni. You see? Ail Dar Yegeretsbo, another ode for the church. Now, we are now getting to Noderkir, which is a more modern era, and this is a much later book of odes from the 17th century, which I also found in Venice. And you will find a sort of Polorkir being used much later as well. It wasn't only Noderkir, but it is different from the earlier one. And there are all sorts of ornaments. Look at these dots and these leaves with the bird there. Tsanzan Aisor Yerging. Heavens rejoice today. The tso there is, look, the beak of a bird there. Beautiful. Much newer than the others, but very beautiful. It's from 1786. So, that concludes our lecture today. I hope Inga manages to catch her lift or her transport home. And thank you very much indeed. So we shall meet again on Friday at a time as yet to be specified. We can stop recording now, and if you've got any questions, I'd be delighted